tensions are rising between the United States and China on the eve of trade talks in Washington. Beijing has slammed what it calls sinister intentions after Washington imposed visa restrictions on some Chinese officials. Those targeted are the officials the U.S. believes are responsible for the detention or abuse of Muslim minorities in Xinjiang. Individuals haven't been named, but the restrictions will also apply to family members of government officials. In announcing the move, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has criticized the detention of minority groups and says China must, quote, end the repression of Muslims in the region. The U.S. has been increasing pressure on China in other ways, with high-level trade talks to resume this week. On Monday, nearly 30 Chinese entities were blacklisted. They were all linked to allegations of abuse in Xinjiang as well. Now, speaking of Xinjiang, it is located in China's far west. Here's a bit more background for you. It's an area rich in natural resources and plays a major role in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Xinjiang is home to China's Uyghur Muslim community, who make up about 45% of the region's population. But there's been large-scale migration of Han Chinese to Xinjiang in recent years due to economic opportunities. Many Uyghurs have complained of discrimination by Chinese authorities, giving rise to tensions in the region. Ethnic riots in 2009 killed nearly 200 people, mainly Han Chinese. Beijing has since carried out a massive security operation in the region. High-tech surveillance systems are in use in public, including facial recognition cameras. Rights groups have also estimated more than 1 million Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities are also being detained in re-education camps. But China claims these are vocational training centers aimed at integrating ethnic minorities into Chinese society, as well as to curb extremism and terrorism.
Well, we'll hear both sides of the story with Olivia Xiong in Beijing and Simon Marks in Washington. Olivia, over to you first. What's the Chinese response been so far to all of this?
Well, as expected, China has firmly opposed the latest U.S. moves. It says that yesterday it has made stern representations and made clear its position to the U.S. And the Chinese position is essentially this, that when it comes to Xinjiang, that these are internal affairs, Chinese affairs, and it is essentially calling on the U.S. to stop its interference. Now, the U.S. has imposed visa restrictions as well as put Chinese entities, including top artificial intelligence firms as well as surveillance firms, on a trade blacklist. It says that this is because of the Chinese mistreatment of Muslim minority groups, including Uyghurs, in Xinjiang. But today, China's foreign ministry firmly refuted those allegations. It says that there are no so-called human rights issues in Xinjiang that the U.S. claims. And it added that the counterterrorism and de-radicalization measures that China has been taking in the region are really to weed out terrorism and extremism as well. And the spokesperson added that this is in line with Chinese law and international practices, and that this is supported by all 25 million Xinjiang people, even though we are hearing contrary reports, as you had mentioned earlier. Now, the Chinese Foreign Ministry also has taken it further, and it says that the U.S. imposing restrictions on China under this pretext is a serious violation of the basic norms governing international relations, and this is something that China opposes. And so what China wants is for the U.S. to, quote, correct its mistake and to withdraw its decision and to stop interfering. Have a listen.
美方罔顾事实，围绕涉疆问题对中国大肆污蔑抹黑，为干涉中国内政蓄意制造借口，干扰新疆反恐努力，阻挠中国稳定发展，只会让中国人民和国际社会进一步认清他们的险恶用心。
A strong defense there, Olivia. Can we expect Beijing to retaliate?
Well, this remains to be seen. Today, China's foreign ministry did say that China will continue to take forceful measures to safeguard its sovereignty as well as its development interests, but the spokesperson did not elaborate on what exactly this meant, and so we have to just continue to wait and read between the lines there. Although we are seeing a report from Reuters saying that China is looking into imposing restrictions on visas for U.S. visitors who have anti-China links. The latest moves from the U.S. giving greater impetus for this. The foreign ministry was also asked about China's unreliable entity list and whether this will now be announced, but the foreign ministry will only continue to reiterate what we have heard from the commerce ministry, that this list will be announced soon. To recap, this unreliable entity list was first announced by China in May after the Chinese telecom giant Huawei was put on a different trade blacklist over national security concerns. And some observers think that this unreliable entity list will be targeting U.S. companies in retaliation, although China has denied this so far. And all this boils down to the big question of whether what is happening between China and the U.S. will affect the upcoming trade talks. Now, China says that it hopes the U.S. will continue to move in the same direction and that they will be able to make progress based on mutual interest and equality. But analysts are saying that the chance for some sort of deal or even a partial deal, now the chances look even slimmer right now.
Many thanks for that, Olivia Xiong, speaking to us from Beijing. And for Washington's reaction, we cross over now to Simon Marks. Simon, two big moves related to the treatment of Uyghurs in the past 48 hours or so. Why is the U.S. bringing up the Xinjiang issue now?
Look, I suppose you could argue, Steve, that almost 3 years into the Trump administration, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the Commerce Department led by Wilbur Ross, and the White House, of course, led by Donald Trump himself, are finally finding their voice on the issue of Xinjiang. But it would be, I think, inevitable that analysts here are looking at the timing of all of this. It's happening right on the eve of the next round of all-important trade talks between the United States and China in the midst of a deepening trade war. And there is a distinction, I think, to be drawn between the sanctions that the Commerce Department announced earlier this week, where we learnt the names specifically of the 28 Chinese companies that are being sanctioned by Wilbur Ross at the Commerce Department, a distinction between that and this move by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. They have not identified the Chinese officials that they say are going to be targeted with these visa restrictions. They haven't explained, certainly to the American public, the reasoning for selecting any specific officials. Ordinarily, when sanctions are imposed, we all get emails from the Department of the Treasury, and those individuals being sanctioned by the United States are publicly unmasked in government documents that the American government publishes. That's not happened so far with regard to these visa restrictions that the Americans say they're going to impose against some, as I say, unidentified Chinese officials. That is adding to the notion here in Washington that this is more of a shot across the bows ahead of trade talks, given that if you haven't published the names of the officials, we may never find out if visa applications are actually denied or if those visa restrictions are in any sense formally lifted. So there seems to be more of an indication that the State Department move is perhaps more directly tied to the trade talks even than the Commerce Department move earlier in the week.
Simon, you mentioned the next round of trade talks. They're imminent, and investors are going to be wanting at least a mini deal out of all of this, if not a more comprehensive one. Can we expect this move now to hinder progress on that trade deal?
Well, it's got to put a cloud over it, as has the ongoing row over the NBA that's taking place inside China. I mean, none of these issues can be divorced from the central issue, which is trade talks. And on that issue of whether a partial deal is possible rather than the full deal that negotiators have been going for, President Trump again at the White House a couple of days ago gave voice to his view that he'd much rather have the full deal. He didn't sound very much like like a man who was interested in half a loaf. He wants to go for the full deal. He keeps insisting the Chinese want to make a deal. The tariffs, he says, have cost 3.5 million jobs in China. Never entirely clear where he gets his statistics from when he makes those claims. But he did indicate that the partial deal was nowhere near as interesting to him as the full deal. And with so many clouds hanging over these talks, it'll be interesting to see if even progress can be made on a mini deal, let alone, as they would say in America, the whole enchilada.
It's looking cloudy and pretty stormy as well by most accounts. Simon, thank you very much for that. That was Simon Marks there, our correspondent in Washington.